All right, hour number 2 on a Tuesday. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. Thanks for joining us here on One Bills Live. Pleased to be joined now, though, by NFL writer for the 33rd team, Dan Pizzuta. It might be the off-season, but Dan's cranking out content over there. Wanted to get him on for a couple of minutes. So, Dan, thanks for joining us, first of all. Second, you're riding the Khalil Shakir train as far as breakout candidates in 2024 goes. I can tell you, you are not alone. But what kind of buoys your hopes that a breakout season is wholly possible for Khalil this year?
Yeah, first of all, thank you guys for having me on. Second, Khalil Shakir is just, first to just start, he's a really fun player. Just kind of the types of things he is able to do. I think kind of going back to college, I think he was kind of underrated in where he came out in the draft. I put together some metrics for college wide receivers every year. And Shakir was very favorable in that and probably should have gotten drafted, by that metric ahead of where he was drafted. And then you kind of just look at what he was able to do in a small sample when he was on the field before this past season. And then when you look at what he was able to do in the offense this past season when he got more playing time. And it was a lot of fun stuff. He's able to work down the field. I think he's a very smooth route runner, probably better than he's given credit for. And I think there were a lot of very cool designs that they used to kind of get him the ball in his hands. They were doing some kind of fake screens to him to get him into space. And I just think he's the kind of guy that can win pretty much anywhere you line him up on the field. So when you have him now, he's going to probably take a much bigger role in this offense. I'm really excited to see how that role is going to develop because I think he can handle a lot of different things.
How much did he show us? I mean, because he didn't see the field that much in the first half of last season. Then with the new offensive coordinator, the change made at the top, he really crescendoed as the season progressed right into the playoffs, right into the Pittsburgh game and the late games against Miami. He crescendoed at the right time to kind of be poised for a better year this year if he can pick up where he left off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of where you're looking at what he was able to do because you can't project a lot of things. And it was, with this offense too, I think once Joe Brady kind of got control of the offense and they were able to do some more fun things in that way, that is definitely where he kind of shined a little bit. And I think that's where kind of spreading the ball out a little more, getting him into space a little more was a little bit more of the focus on the offense. And, without a, bona fide number one type of receiver that they're not really going to have this year unless someone really steps up. I think that's going to be more of how this offense runs. And I think that is going to be, really beneficial to a guy like Shakir, who I think, like I said, can, be really good in the slot. And I think you have a bunch of receivers who can be really good in the slot, but I think he can be good outside some of the screens that they were running for him, some of the just downfield things. So I think there's a lot of good things that we saw in how Joe Brady kind of tried to use him in the offense last year that I think is going to translate it to 2024.
Another list you put together was underrated players in the NFL. Another Bill made that list. That was Ed Oliver, who made number 3 on the list that you put together. I don't know what your feeling is on this, Dan. It's not like the Bills are not a highly visible team. I mean, they had 9 games in primetime windows last year after all the flexing. And yet Ed Oliver may have had the quietest 9.5 sack season for a defensive tackle on the planet. Why do you think he still remains underrated even now?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a fault of the expectations a little bit that he kind of, I think, had coming into his career, being such a high draft pick. I think and he was kind of billed at the time as, he could be, the Bills version of Aaron Donald, and he hasn't been that. And I don't think those are fair expectations to really put on anyone. And then there were, some stop and starts to him a little bit. I think, the 2022 season, he was, some injuries he was playing through. But if you look at like ESPN's pass rush win rate and run stop win rate. He was I think he was the only interior defender in the top 10 of both. So he was still really good under the radar there. And then just kind of this past year, I think there were a lot of other things going on with the Bills, right? Even though there were a lot of eyeballs on them, you had, the offensive transition that was happening in the middle of the year. You had some of the other things with injuries that were going on the defense. So not a lot of people were focusing on what Ed Oliver was doing, but man, his 2023 season was really incredible when you go back and really watch what he was doing, the way the Bills were lining him up in different spots to kind of put him in spots that were in a deficit because of some of those injuries. He was lining up on the edge, a couple on third downs and things like that. So when you really look at how versatile he was and the production he had a great 2023 season. And again, I expect that to continue into 2024.
Today on our show, we asked our viewers and listeners, what about this 2024 edition of the Buffalo Bills deserves more attention? And earlier in the show, I said, for me, it has nothing to do about this team. It has to do with about their schedule, really tough schedule coming down. And I think if there's anything, and one thing we've seen from this team over the last 3 years, if they don't help you, you're not going to beat them. And they've got a schedule this year that is even as formidable as it is. The Bills are kind of used to it. It's their fourth straight year of a first place schedule.
Yeah, I think I'm doing some work on the FTN Almanac, formerly Football Outsiders Almanac this year, and I know just kind of looking at our projections, I do believe the Bills have the toughest schedule in the league by a projected DVOA. So, yeah, that is a lot. So, but again, this is a good team, like you said. It's not something that they're not used to. So. I still would expect them to be hanging in a lot of these games. And, if you look at, something that does give you do want more attention on, I think it is kind of going to be the offense and some of those pass catchers. When you look at like Shakir, I think, there are some people, just kind of overall in the grand scheme of people who are looking at some league wide, probably a little concerned about what the Bills are going to have at pass catcher without Diggs now. But I think you have three pretty solid guys with Samuel, Shakir, and Keon Coleman. I'm very interested to see how those three guys are going to shake out in the roles they play. So I think all of them probably are at their best in the slot, but I do think you have a guy like Shakir who can win outside. I think you just have a lot of different ways to win. So I think even if there's not that number one guy, I think there are a lot of really interesting receiving options that can win in a number of different ways. So I'm not as concerned about that offense and the pass catching group that I think like some people are, that I've kind of seen some concern there.
And because of that, Dan, and I know NFL.com's Bucky Brooks has mentioned this, and maybe if that new receiving core is a little slow to gel, this is a team that could be leaning on two tight end sets, something they did at the beginning of the season last year under former coordinator Ken Dorsey. Then Dawson Knox gets hurt, and the thing just disappears and falls off a cliff, and they lean on Kincaid a whole lot more. But could you see that as a way to kind of get this offense out of the starting blocks while that receiving core, which is very new, gets up to speed?
Yeah, I think so. That's probably something they are going to want to lean on a little bit. And that was definitely what was the goal, I think, when they drafted Kincaid. I think, and I wrote about this for the 33rd team with some of the 12 personnel. When you kind of get into your issues, is you're trying to be this mismatch type of offense, right? When you have two tight ends on the field, you're kind of hoping that teams are going to, they're going to be too small in nickel or they're going to be too slow in base. Defenses are more inclined to just play nickel against two tight end sets now and kind of dare you to run against them when you're the offense. So one of the things that would make me a little more optimistic for the Bills in those sets is how much better the run game was under Joe Brady. Mm-hmm. And I think that is going to help a little bit when they are in those heavier sets. I think they are going to have a little bit more of that run game be a threat when they do have two tight ends on the field. And that is then going to open up some things in the passing game. So if they can get some things where Knox and Kincaid are blocking really well, and they can have the run as an actual threat, I think that's where you can kind of live in that 12 personnel a little more. Because if you're only doing that when the pass is a threat and you're really getting stuffed in the run because you have some of those heavier formations, and the defense is still playing light, but they're able to stop the run, that's when teams really have a lot of those struggles in 12 personnel. But I think the Bills are going to have a little bit more to be able to run, especially when you look at, the focus they had in some of those, personnel groupings, just the run game in general over the second half of that season. So I think Brady's going to bring that. And I think they can live in 12 personnel a little more than they were able to, and more successfully, at least, than they were at points last year.
Well, if you set 12 personnel aside, two tight end sets aside, what other trends do you see maybe mushrooming this year in the NFL? Is it, and I know there's some speculation about roster management with the new kickoff rules, what the return guy is going to look like. The 12 personnel, certainly the too high safety look that everybody sees. And what trends do you notice or think are going to expand or emerge?
I'm really interested to actually see how much more pistol is going to be run in the NFL this year. I think that's something where we're finding teams, when they're kind of trying to marry some of their run game and the pass game, they're kind of struggling to mix their under center runs and their shotgun passing. And I think we've seen a couple of teams this year, especially the Rams in the second half of the year, really fix their offense and really just kind of reworked their offense into running a lot more pistol. So they kind of are marrying a little bit of the under center runs and the shotgun passing in the same formation. And I think we're going to kind of see that spread a little bit more across the league. There's been a ton of teams that were able to do that. I think, Baltimore with Lamar Jackson's been doing that. And you see it with some mobile quarterbacks too. I think Josh Allen could potentially, be one of those guys. So I wouldn't be surprised to see just the pistol offense and some of the expansive things you can do in that way, to have some of those, up the middle type of runs like the Rams did last year. I know the Rams used it a lot in quick game last year. I know Seattle did it a lot last year also, and now that offensive coordinator is in Chicago with Caleb Williams. I wouldn't be surprised to see them, run pistol a little more, just kind of, get a little bit of that, the under center and shotgun at the same time. And I think that just kind of gives you a little more deception on what you can do in some of those plays too. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the bigger trends on offense this year.
Yeah, the Bills saw Miami use pistol a decent amount. They
Yep.
put Achane back there, and doesn't matter if he's lining up directly behind the quarterback. He can get to the edge in a hiccup. So wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that from Miami. Last one from me, Dan. The Bills, we were kind of surprised to see this. We knew they were going to get an extra $10 million in cap space after June 1st via the release of Tre'Davious White. It created some more cap room. We thought that was going to be used mainly to sign their draft class. But I looked at the NFLPA report on cap room, and the Bills have 11.2 in cap space. Now, I know they like to carry about 5 or 6 for emergency, injuries, so they can sign people off the street and add players to the roster like that. But that's more than they usually carry. I'm wondering if there's, a late signing here in the summer, maybe at the cornerback position. Stephon Gilmore is still sitting out there, started his career with the Bills. Is that guy an option? Fabian Moreau, Darryl Worley, Chandon Sullivan. What do you think of the cornerback market that's still out there, and could you see that being a possibility?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you've kind of seen over the past couple of years, you can never really have enough corners. That's probably one of the positions where as long as you're loading up with depth, you're not doing anything wrong. So you can never have too many of those players. I love the Gilmore fit. I know at one point during the offseason, I was kind of writing best fits for some of the remaining free agents. And I did have Gilmore there. I think he could be, that veteran presence in a, now very young secondary, especially with the corners. I think he would be the type of guy who can still get the turnovers. Might not be that, that he's not the 2019, defensive player of the year
Right.
version of himself anymore, but I think you just have to not really get beat all that often at corner now. Just don't be that weak link in the area, and he certainly still has that ability. So I would see him as a potential there. And then if you're looking at safety, Justin Simmons is still sitting out there, which I know there haven't been a lot of safeties getting paid this off season, and I also wrote something on the 3013 about the safeties who are getting paid or the guys who really just do it all. Kind of the Antoine Winfields of the world, and Simmons isn't quite that anymore, but in the way the Bills want to play defense, like Justin Simmons is a guy who can really fit, can play that too high, can rotate, can be one of those interchangeable guys where you can have, the shell look one way and the post snap rotation is going to be something completely different. I think he's still playing at a high level. And as of this point, he's not going to cost a lot. And I think that would be something where the Bills could definitely fortify kind of the back end of that secondary too. So, any veteran option, I think in that secondary is probably going to help Buffalo at this point.
Dan, good stuff. Thanks for spending some time with us.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you, guys.